In this video, I'm talking once again to Martin Ball. Now, I first spoke to Martin towards the end of 2020, and we had a conversation on the subject of 5-MeO-DMT and non-duality. And it was a conversation I very much enjoyed, and that was pretty much that. Or so I thought. But within the last week or so, another channel called Psymposia released a video which focused on several of Martin's anecdotes and highlighted just how weird some of these events sound. And yeah, I mean, they definitely sound weird, and I don't think anyone would dispute that. And certainly my reaction when I watched that Psymposia video was that, yeah, I found it pretty shocking. The other thing though was that the video contained a very small and almost unrecognisable clip of me, but many people did spot that it was me and made that connection, and so asked for my opinion on it. So I kind of got pulled into this topic. Now, I just want to be clear here that I have no problem at all with Psymposia using my clip. You know, us YouTubers do that all the time. It's absolutely fine. So I'm not interpreting this as Psymposia trying to start some sort of beef with me. And likewise, I don't have any grievance with them. That said, I went and watched the source material from which Psymposia made their piece to see if it would shed some light on Martin's practices. And it did, and it kind of became clear that I think Psymposia had created a very bad faith interpretation of the events being described. And in my opinion, it was overblowing certain elements to make them sound more shocking than they actually were. Still, some of what was described I certainly would not want done to me while I was under the influence of 5-MeO-DMT. So I had some questions for Martin, and I wanted to give him the opportunity to publicly respond. So I reached out to him and we had a chat about it, and here it is. And I think this conversation really fills out the context. So whatever your opinion of Martin and his practices, at least now you'll have the full picture. We cover all the major beats here of the Psymposia video and some additional stuff. So we talk about vomiting on people, touching people in ways that might be considered inappropriate. We talk about people having violent reactions to 5-MeO-DMT, and also some of the comparisons that have been made between Martin and Octavio Rettig, who many of you will know is someone I've called out for his own controversial practices. Now, I appreciate that this is quite a long conversation, and that rather than sit through it in one go, you might just be curious about how Martin answers specific questions. So I'll put timestamps to each topic in the description below so you can dive straight to the bit that interests you. But if you do get the chance though, then please check out the full thing. I had some personal insights during this conversation, which made me realise just how weird some of my own experience has been on things like ayahuasca retreats. But that them being weird doesn't necessarily make them bad or dangerous, and that if I'm making a sovereign decision about my own experience, then that's something I should have the liberty to do, regardless of how weird it sounds. So okay, with all that said, without further ado, I bring you Martin Ball. So I'm here once again with Martin Ball, and the reason being is that many people reached out to me in the light of the recent video from the channel Psymposia, because it contained a very brief clip of me, and they wanted to know what my take or involvement was on that video, which really focused on Martin and some of his practices as a psychedelic facilitator, specifically around 5-MeO-DMT. And I think it's fair to say that the video in question was critical of Martin, and that it was edited in a way to provoke a fairly visceral reaction within the viewer. And I think that reaction would be something along the lines of like, holy shit, this is really weird. This guy can sound completely nuts. And I think based on that video, that reaction is fairly understandable. I don't think it's entirely fair though to form a conclusion based just off that video. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation, and I want to lay out what the purpose of this conversation is for the benefit of the audience. So I don't think this is, from my side anyway, this is not really intended to be like a rebuttal of that Psymposia video, but really just to facilitate the bigger conversation about what's described there. Because I think this is one of those situations where context is really important. And I want to say up front that I think I'm fairly impartial here. Now, obviously I spoke to Martin just a few months ago, but it's not like I'm a client of his or that we are lifelong friends. Really, the sort of entirety of our relationship is that previous conversation, which anyone can go and watch. And likewise, I don't have any connection to or particular grievance with Psymposia. They use that little piece of footage from me. I'm absolutely fine with that, you know, fair use and all that. And I think they did seem to go out of the way to sort of anonymize me within that clip. So I guess they just like the soundbite. But I'm saying all this anyway, not because I want to distance myself from Martin or from Psymposia, but just because I want to stress that I am impartial here. I'm neither pro nor against any of these guys. And the role that I'm trying to carve out here on YouTube is that of someone who's looking at psychedelic culture through the eyes of an ordinary person. You know, I'm not a guru, I'm not an investigative journalist, I'm not deep into this spiritual practice or that one. And if anything, I've built up a bit of a reputation as a skeptic who calls out bad practice or ideas. And I'm perfectly happy to do that today. So there's no particular bias or agenda on my part. But what I do think is important here is that there is a conversation. And that's why I reached out to Martin, because on the one hand, I can understand people's reaction to that Psymposia video. And there's definitely some stuff that's mentioned in there that I don't agree with personally. But on the other hand, I just don't think it's a good faith interpretation of the original lecture. So the only real sort of goal here is to have a conversation, to add some context. And the ballast that I want us to all have in our tanks here is grounded rationality. And let's see where we get to. And with that in mind, Martin, how shall we skin this cat? I think there's various ways we can go at this. I think it's probably important that we hit like the main beats of that Psymposia video, because they sort of timestamped certain things which they seem to have issue with. And I think there's another one that's kind of implied in there. So yeah, I mean, is there any particular way you want to sort of go at this, or shall we just work through it as in sort of sequentially?
Well, first, I just want to start by saying thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast and actually have a conversation about this. That I was initially contacted by Psymposia by this guy, Russell, saying that, you know, he was working on an article on abusive practices of psychedelic facilitators and therapists. And he had a number of questions from the video, and I responded to his questions, but essentially the questions that he was asking me, all the answers to those questions were in the original video itself. So I don't know if that really added anything to it. And then he sent me a few follow-up questions, and I provided him with some more materials. And my impression of the original email was that it was clearly aggressive and hostile. I mean, it was quite clear from the message, like, oh, these guys are not looking to say anything good about me, but they've asked me for information, so I will provide that information with them. And I've always prided myself on being open, available. You know, if they have their own podcast, if they wanted to bring me on and talk about it, I would make myself available for that. I would also note that at this point, I have reached out both to Russell and to another person associated with Psymposia, inviting them to come on my podcast to talk about it. And they have not responded to my emails. Just one of them left a comment on my Facebook page saying, we are not going to engage with you on your platform. And so then actually earlier today, I wrote down a long list of questions that I had for Russell. And I said, you sent me questions and I responded. Here are my questions for you. Now, I do want to just talk about the original video for just a moment, and then I'm more than happy to get into any of the specifics that are in there. So the original video was recorded by the Los Angeles Medicinal Plant Society, and it was held on the UCLA campus. I think it was in 2016 was when that was recorded. And it's a rather long video. It's a 2.5 hour long video, which even there, you know, they say, well, we provided a link to the original video. I'm not sure how many people are going to click through and watch a 2.5 hour video, that if you're presenting an 11-minute summation of the video. But anyway, in giving that talk, I was invited because one of the people associated with LAMPS actually had done a session with me, and he was quite impressed by the session that he had with me. And they invited me to talk about it. And by that point in time that I gave that talk, I think it's important to note that everything that is mentioned in that talk is in the past tense, that I had retired from giving sessions at that point. And I have not given any sessions since that time, that I am fully retired. And I will also say that, you know, as you can see by even watching their little 11-minute video, I am a very enthusiastic public speaker. I'm not passive. I don't just sit around. I walk around a lot. I make a lot of big gestures with my body. I do a lot of stuff with my voice. I play different characters. I enjoy it. I enjoy
Mhm.
being a public speaker. And it's actually something that goes all the way back to childhood. I got into theater and I've always enjoyed it. Um, so in that talk, what I'm doing is basically for the very first time, I'm sharing what were really outstand, outstanding events that happened within my practice that I thought were worthwhile to share, as well as also giving the general overview of just what it was. And it's also something that I've always said that it's going to be really difficult from anyone from outside to understand what it is
Mhm.
that I do with people and what I'm talking about. And I understand that it can sound really shocking and it can sound really, really bizarre. And I want to emphasize that that's what I was communicating in that video, is that this was shocking to me as well, which is why I'm
Yeah.
sharing
I
these
mean, I think
things.
that was one of the things which is kind of very obvious from the original video, and I think is lacking in the Symposia one, is that one of the first things you say in the full length is like, you're acknowledge how absolutely fucking weird that these are like the weirdest sort of situations. I mean, that's kind of what we do when we do talks like that. We don't just recount through all the mundane ones. We you bring up the sort of the weird events, and yeah, and I think that piece of framing is missing, and I think the other piece of framing which is bundled around it is the title of Advice for Psychedelic Guides by Dr. Martin Ball, as though this is
Right.
actually the day-to-day playbook, which again I thought was a little bit disingenuous there. But so carry on around the original lecture.
Yeah. So the original lecture itself, I agreed to let them film it. I agreed to let them post it. And somewhat ironically, I mean, it's been out for about 5 years now.
Mhm.
Um, and I've heard from lots of people about that video. And the number one thing that I hear from people who have watched that video is, please, will you come out of retirement so that you can work with me? I've watched this video. I understand that you get it. You go inside the experience with people and that you have a level of working with them that is unparalleled. And please, will you work with me? And I literally get an email almost once a week from people who have watched that video.
Mhm.
And it's also very common. It's a common place that people cite for why they reach out to me for a consultation about their own 5-MeO experience or their experience with other psychedelics. And they say, I watched that video and it really made me feel that you get it and that you've been there with people. And that's
Mhm.
why I trust you to talk to you about this. And everyone also says, I definitely would not want to be vomited on. And I say, well, of course, no one wants that. No one wants that. And then I always tell them, it's like, it only happened a couple of times, but I've always felt it was worthwhile mentioning because just like everyone else, right? You would assume that vomiting on someone would be taken as just the most vile, disgusting thing ever. Yet, on the few rare instances that it happened, the people that it happened to expressed gratitude and appreciation for it. And we can spend a lot of time talking about vomiting because there was a lot of vomiting that took place in the sessions that I did, both by myself and by my clients, and it was a main feature of something that occurred. So that's just kind of the background on the video itself. And since that time of that video, I mean, I've given dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews talking about all of the same stuff. So none of this is really new. And, as I also pointed out to the people at Psymposia, my 2017 book, Entheogenic Liberation, this is the full manual of everything that I
Mhm.
did within my sessions. And even, when it gets to that part about advice, the title that they gave it for the video that I sent them, there's a chapter here in Entheogenic Liberation that is almost a verbatim transcript of the talk that I would give with each and every one of my clients before I ever worked with them. And so when it gets to the question of advice, like the chapter is being a non-dual energetic practitioner. And that was a distinction that I made with Psymposia. I said, no, I'm not just talking about psychedelic therapy. I'm talking about a unique methodology that I developed that I called non-dual energetic therapy. And people can disagree whether therapy is the right term or not. But the very first sentence of the chapter is the chances that anyone reading this is qualified to be considered a full non-dual psychedelic therapy practitioner are slim. So I'm already acknowledging that what I'm referring to here is not something that I consider to be a general or average practice, and that it's not, certainly not for everyone, and that I think that it's something that you would have to, in my opinion, you'd have to go through what I went through in order to be able to do it. And also what I think is significant about the video, because they produced the video in conjunction with going after Mark Hayden, who has just retired from being the executive director of MAPS Canada. Because I helped produce a book for him called Manual for Psychedelic Guides, and I've got that book right here. And if you notice, at the very beginning of the video, they show the cover of this book, and then they focus in on my name on the book. And they also included the video as part of their article of Mark Hayden retires after a year of controversy. And so they really seem to be tying my talk and my methods with what we did with this book. And there's zero relationship at all between my own practice and this book. So that's what I would mention about the original video itself.
Yeah, and I think I just throw in there that with the edited video, just as you've described, there's no real smoking gun here. This is stuff that's very sort of been out there, and I think, as you say, if they'd asked you the questions, you would have sort of come up with the same answer. So, I appreciate that's not necessarily what Psymposia may have been trying to do, but that, when something new comes into the sphere, it does have this kind of appearance of, oh wow, this is something, some archived piece of footage that's just been revealed. Where really it's like I say, this is very sort of public, nothing that you wouldn't say or hasn't been available before.
Yeah, and actually with the LAMPS video itself, that they have hosted a number of different talks at UCLA. That video with me is their most watched video. So it's not like that was some kind of secret video that nobody had access to. And in terms of videos with me that are on YouTube, I think that it's the second most watched video. The most watched video with me is the interview that I did with Leo Guerra in 2015, I think it was.
Yeah, so I think it's probably good to just address then some of the sort of the key bits that pop up in that video. And I think the first one that I want to just tackle is one which isn't actually stated by Psymposia, but I certainly saw it floating up in the comments and stuff. And I thought this was one which was leaning towards hysteria. And so I think it's important that we bring the energy of that one down straight away. And sure. I'm paraphrasing here, but the overall gist is something along the lines of, is Martin a predator? Predator being sort of hot word of the moment. And holy shit, this guy's on a par with Octavio Rettig. And for those of you who don't know, Octavio Rettig is another practitioner of sort of Bufo, 5-MeO DMT, who's been very controversial because for some of his practices I've sort of been seen as dangerous. I've done a ceremony with Octavio Rettig, and I've also been very critical about Octavio Rettig because I think some of his practices just cross the line into sort of unethical. And yeah, so there was these comparisons between yourself and Octavio Rettig, and I don't know what your stance is on Octavio, but from where I'm sat, because I'm conscious that people are going to be thinking, oh God, this guy's just a massive hypocrite because he's been speaking out against Octavio, but now he's talking to Martin. First of all, I would happily talk to Octavio. I'll talk to anybody and facilitate these conversations and see what Octavio's got to say. But I think the the comparison is just not fair to me. Octavio has, if the reports are to be believed, a body count attached to him. And there is a long list of people complaining, like ex-clients complaining about Octavio. And I don't think that's the case with yourself, Martin. From what I've, I did my sort of due diligence of Googling, and I couldn't find this list of complaints or open letters against you. So I don't know if you've got anything to say around that topic, but I think, for anyone who's making those comparisons, I think we just need to, they just don't stand up, I think.
Yeah, well, that's been one of my starting points with Psymposia. Is I asked them, it's like, well, do you have any accounts of anybody complaining about my work? And this puts me into somewhat of a difficult situation, because it's not that I want to brag about my work, but in a sense, it kind of forces me to, because what I have, rather than anyone complaining about me or saying that I violated them or that I hurt them or that I harmed them, is that I have person after person after person after person after person thanking me with heartfelt gratitude for the work that I did with them. And I even sent Psymposia, early on in my practice, I had asked my clients, the people that I'd worked with at that point, if they would be willing to provide a testimonial for working with me. And they did, and they were all glowing. And I sent those over to Psymposia so that they could see those. And also, they contacted, of course, the people at Lamps. And they also, I have the letter that Lamps wrote back to them, and I'll just address this really quickly. It says, we spoke with numerous people in the community about their sessions and feelings about Martin and his work, and received mostly glowing feedback about him, both as an individual and as a practitioner. Many clients indicated that they felt him to be a man of good character doing important, caring work. One of us had the pleasure of having a session with Martin prior to his retirement, and the experience could be said to be life-changing. Later on, they say, actually, no, I don't need to get into that at the moment.
Okay.
So in other words, I provided them with material, and I said, I have never received a complaint from anyone. I also pointed out to them that even in the examples that I give in the video, those people came back for more. That, for example, the 79-year-old woman that is mentioned, she considered that to be her pre-80th birthday present to herself. And she came back for 2 more sessions with me. And that also, because I knew really early on. Now, first, let me say, I didn't learn my techniques from anyone. No one taught me any of this. I am not a trained therapist. I'm not a trained psychedelic facilitator. I have made my own way. That I learned all of this through discovery and through doing of it. And so as my practice developed very early on, and I realized, like, okay, there's all these kind of weird things that are taking place that are really out of the ordinary. It's really unusual, and it's not what someone would necessarily expect when they're going for some kind of psychedelic therapy or psychedelic experience. So I created a PDF where I kind of outlined, here's all the ways that I might be interacting with you within our experience. I also provided that to Psymposia, but I said this is not for public dissemination. So I'm providing this to you out of respect for your inquiries.
Sure.
And then I also had, as I mentioned, in Entheogenic Liberation, it was my 1-hour introductory talk that I would give to every new client that I had. And even there, I had a number of clients say, yeah, I read through the PDF. Can we just get to it? And I was like, no, we're going to go through all the details. And in general, my patients or clients, whatever we want to call them, they came to me with the idea of, I want the Martin Ball treatment. And yes, my practices sound really, really extreme. But again, it kind of puts me in this position where I have to speak highly of myself. That most of my clients felt that their work with me was the most profound work they had ever received in their lives. I had a number of people who also came to me who had had 5-MeO DMT experiences with other providers, and they were all in agreement that the work that they did with me was light years beyond what they had experienced in other contexts. And I even had two people independently, these were two different people who had had 5-MeO DMT experiences prior with people that I would consider to be providers, which is a really standard method in the sense of someone provides you with the medicine, they provide you with the space to have the experience, you have your experience all by yourself, and then you come out of it, and then they either help you integrate or not. So for me, that's a provider, whereas I'm describing myself as a practitioner. And these two people who had had these prior experiences, it was kind of funny because they actually said the exact same quote. They both said, what I got before in my previous 5-MeO experience was like kindergarten compared to working with you was going to graduate school. So those are the kinds of responses, and, I posted this to my Facebook page of the video, and people are asking me like, well, given everybody's negative reaction to this video, does this make you question your work at all? And my response is, I base my work off of the responses of the people that I work with, not by people who are outside and creating sensationalized videos that are obviously designed to elicit an emotional reaction from people. And that's why I've also invited, I said, look, if anyone who has worked with me has any complaints, I invite you to step forward, share it with me, share it with Psymposia, share it with anyone. And the opposite is what we've gotten so far, is that a number of people who have worked with me, and I didn't ask anyone, I didn't go on a post and say, please, everybody who's worked with me, please tell them how positive it was. A number of people have independently gone and left comments on these posts on Facebook and on YouTube saying that they had absolute respect and trust in their experiences with me and felt that there was full disclosure of all of my methods, that there was full consent all the way along. So to me, it feels like a manufactured issue. Yeah. Personally, that's my take.
Yeah, and I think there's something there around. There's two things I've been sort of trying to jostle with. One is just our sovereign control of ourselves as human beings. That if I am given the right information, like you talk about the information that you present with your clients and the talk that you have with them. If I'm given that information, then I should have sovereign right to agree to that or not, or to walk away. But then there is another aspect that gets raised there, which is sort of people, and I think this is in light of a lot of the stuff that's happened in the wider world culturally, where people are talking about the kind of the power dynamic, and that can someone really consent there in these situations because you are the kind of the guru and you're up here and they're sort of looking up to you, and so it opens the door to this kind of sort of predatory behavior. Now, I'm going to say I'm playing the devil's advocate here, because I do not think this is the case, and I think this is, like I say, I think this is one area where it's easy for us to kind of slip into hysteria, and it's very hard to defend against as well, because I've seen people talking about, well, they don't know that they've got a problem now, but they'll realize it in 5 years' time or something like that. So it's a very tricky thing to navigate. But I think, yeah, and that's why I think where the statements from your clients, we've got to take them, I think, at the value that there are, because again, I really did look into this and I could not find anything sort of negative, and I think it would make for a far more interesting conversation if I did. Yeah. But I genuinely couldn't, and so I think we can't. There's something around us projecting or inventing, some sort of horror where there isn't any. And again, I think that's just it. I'm just really zeroing in on the kind of the predator sort of dangerousness of it here. So yeah, I think let's put that kind of one to one side. I think that's, like I say, I think that's pretty sort of baseless. And let's move on to onto the vomit situation, which we touched on a little bit already. And I think the quote here that Psymposia uses, Ball discusses his enthusiasm for vomiting on people, and I think I mean when I watched the video, I mean I'd say there's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight I personally disagree with, and I was like I probably would not want to go through a ceremony with, like, based on some of this knowledge. But and you watch the video, and again it does provoke a reaction. It came up with a visceral reaction. I mean, I was like, oh my God, this is bad. And then when I stopped and thought about it, particularly in the context of my own experiences, I was like, actually, I've had shamans burping in my face and spitting all over me. I've had, the skin burnt off my arm and sort of frog venom rubbed into it. I've been to like ecstatic dances, which have been, pretty much just ended up in like orgies. There's so much things out on the fringes of this kind of psychedelic and sort of inner work, where that if you put it on paper or frame it in a certain light, there's not a lot that's not incredibly weird. So, and that's where I think that's where when I sort of got my head around the sort of Psymposia video, and I just thought, no, the context is missing here, because yeah, sure, I've seen, like, documentaries or videos on YouTube, say around, iboga ceremonies, where sort of, some woman who has cancer and she goes to this like traditional Bwiti iboga ceremony, and they're pushing root bark down her throat, they're holding her nose and she's gagging, and they're like, no more, and they're stuffing it down her throat, and then they're keeping her up, and she's making her dance all night. She dances, she keeps falling over. But I could edit that into a horror story. But we wouldn't. I think if I tried to do that, I'd get eviscerated, because then I'd be a massive racist, and I'd be sort of, culturally ignorant. But it's very fringe. It's very sort of weird, but we give it that kind of space because it's got the context. It's got the context of a very extreme ceremony. And I don't think there's any disputing that you're operating in that same space of something extreme on the fringes. But it is, from what I gather, it's consensual. This is sovereign adults, and it doesn't seem like there's any sort of shenanigans necessarily going on there. So once I'd kind of framed that within my own experiences and managed to sort of bring myself down from the visceral reaction, to be honest, the vomiting thing I thought was probably one of the things I had the least problem with. I was like, oh yeah, fine, if a shaman did that to me, fine, if that's what comes up in the work. But is there anything you want to sort of flesh out more around the vomiting topic?
Yeah, sure. There's stuff I'd love to. There's a lot of volume there. But first, I just want to touch on something that you just said, because this is actually something that kind of came to mind to me the other night. Was when you're an anthropologist and you're studying another culture and they have ways that are really different from yours, it is not considered ethical on the part of the anthropologist to judge those practices by their own standards and by their own culture. And we have kind of a weird situation here where essentially, because this is all a method and technique that I developed on my own, I'm essentially a culture of one. And that culture is not there, it's not shared by anybody else except for the clients with whom I worked. And so that anybody from outside coming in and putting their own standards of what they think is proper or improper, I think is kind of along the lines of an anthropologist misrepresenting a culture that they're studying. And just like you say, like if you were to take video of Bwiti ceremonies and edit it in a way that is graphic, that is meant to evoke disgust and horror, that you would be called out for it. Not, I mean, people might say, wow, Bwiti tradition is weird, I don't want anything to do with that. But the ethical violation would be on the part of the anthropologist who created something like that. And I think that in its own way, that's a bit of what we're going through here. So anyway, let's talk about vomit. That
Well,
actually,
can I just make one
yeah,
little point
sure.
before going into that? Is that what I think as well is that there's a bit of a kind of a layer here in the sort of psychedelic culture where we're trying to have our cake and eat it as well. Because on the one hand, we're you know, psychedelics are kind of, this is medicine, this is healing, we're sort of doing this, and then on the other sort of hand, we start imposing all these kind of Western standards of well, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, whereas, you know, if we really sort of you know, believed in these things as the kind of these, you know, healing things, and that's, you know, people are coming with extreme traumas, and so they need to release some sort of this energy, or that the relationship with you is as a healer, then yeah, I think that's, I mean, I have a relationship with my, you know, with my healers, be it whether it's a traditional sort of shaman or whether it's my GP. And I've had my GP stick his finger up my ass, you know, I mean, that's how much more intimate do you want to get, you know?
Yeah.
So we can't have our sort of cake and eat it. We can't say, oh yeah, no, this is medicine and there's a healing thing going on. But actually, no, anybody who's not a GP can't touch people in these certain ways or can't do certain things. I think we're in a sort of a fringe of a fringe here where things get weird. But anyway, that just popped into my head. Let's go back to the vomiting.
Yeah. So just vomiting in general is actually something that tended to happen with my clients, with me, probably at a higher proportion than in any other context of 5-MeO-DMT. Like, it's interesting that I've had people, you know, because I do consultations, right? I talk to people on Skype, just like we're doing now, and we talk about their experiences. And I've had some people say that they have vomited on 5-MeO-DMT, and that the person who provided them with the experience of 5-MeO-DMT, they say, that person said I was the first person who ever vomited. They'd never seen that before. They didn't know that people would vomit on 5-MeO-DMT. And look, for me, the way that I worked, it was a very unique kind of context, because not only was the client taking 5-MeO-DMT, I was taking it with them, and for the express purpose of finding where do they have stuck energy that they need help processing out. And so for my session space, I had a mat on the floor, and I had to have a waterproof cover on the mat. And then I had towels placed at the head of the mat for people to lie down. And I learned this the hard way. So I would always sit at the very foot of the mat, because this kind of spatial relationship that we have right now is absolutely fundamental to the way that I work with people. There has to be this direct head-on balance between us. And we also both need to be using bilateral symmetry within our bodies so that we can energetically sync in with each other. So anyway, I would sit at the mat, and I learned the hard way that I also had to put a towel on the mat, or at the foot of the mat where I would sit, because so many people threw up. And it was cathartic for them. It was part of the process. And so the towel that was at the head of the mat, that was for when people lie down, and then I called this like the volcano, where they'd lie back and all of a sudden they would just throw up, and it'd get all over them. And then I had to put the towel where I sat, because many of them would sit up, look right at me, and then throw up on me. And so I had to have a towel there. And then for some clients, I learned, oh, I actually have to place towels all the way around the outside of the mat for this client, because they're going to throw up. And this was one of the things that I would always talk about in my introductory talk with people. And it was also in the PDF that I sent people, where I would say, no one ever wants to throw up. Nobody likes vomit. But what's happening in these sessions is that people are letting go of something that they feel ashamed of, or something that they hate about themselves, or some part of themselves that they've rejected, or some part of themselves that they've denied, or that they've repressed in some way. And in the vast majority of situations where people were throwing up like this, and this is another thing that people are just like, oh my God, this is so bizarre. But I had so many people who would throw up on themselves and then they would rub it all over themselves in a state of ecstasy. And what was very clear energetically, what's happening there is like, oh, this is beautiful. This person has just found a part of themselves that they were ashamed of and they hated, and now they're releasing it, and they've realized that they don't need to hold on to it, and that they don't need to keep it inside, and that they can also love it at the same time and be in this state of paradox of, I don't want this, but I can love it. So sessions with me were often extraordinarily messy. I also often encourage people to bring an extra set of clothing. And so 99% of people getting vomit on themselves was them vomiting on themselves. And even sometimes when they vomited right in my lap, people would take their heads and they would just roll around in it. And, I'm just sitting there like, wow, oh, okay.
Just do what you got to do.
Yeah, this is what this person needs. Now, in terms of my own vomiting, and I think this is probably, I haven't gone back and rewatched the lamps video, but I think that this is probably in there. And if it's not, well, then here's a new addition. What I found early on in my practice is that on occasion, stuck energy inside my clients that they might not be able to release could transfer into me, and I could throw up and they would feel better. And I had my throw up bucket. So I, throw up in the bucket, put it over there. And this was also something that I had to tell my clients, that I would say, if I throw up, or if you throw up and you get it into the bucket, I will leave the room and wash out the bucket and come back. And I always informed them of that. And I said that it's important to know that I haven't disappeared, that I'm just going cleaning this out. And that's important because there's also times when people would be looking right at me and they tell me later, well, you just disappeared. And then suddenly you reappeared. And I said, well, this is not a case of that. I actually have left the room. And now I'm coming back and I've got a clean bucket. So when I first started my practice, it was relatively rare that energy would transfer into me and that then I would throw up for the client. But then a couple years before I stopped, something happened. And the something is I had this gentleman come who also had a previous 5-MeO DMT experience. And he said it was beautiful and wonderful. And he came to me. He was one of these people who said, I want the Martin Ball experience. I was like, okay. So he came to work with me. And he took a hit and he laid back down on the mat. And for me, balanced bilateral symmetry is very, very important. So I knew something was up because he's lying on the mat and then his head shifted to the side like this. And so that's an indication that, okay, his ego is engaged with something that he's projecting out over here. Then he got up. So keep in mind the whole time, I'm just sitting at the end of the bed. I'm not doing a single thing, just sitting there. He's looking off to the side. Then he gets up and he looks at me. And I've never seen this look in anybody's eyes before. But very clearly, this man was coming to kill me. And he came up and he just started punching me as hard as he could in the face, just again and again and again. He was literally trying to bash my skull in. And I tried saying stop a couple times and he just kept punching. And then finally I just said, enough. And he kind of snapped out of it. And then he said, just get the gun and put it to my head and kill me. I don't own a gun. I don't know what he's talking about. He's completely freaking out. And he's like, just kill me. Just do it. Just kill me now. Do it. And then his brother was downstairs. He ended up running downstairs and saying, well, I think I've really hurt Martin. We need to leave right now. And he and his brother left. He later contacted me and said that while his head was off to the side, he was in communication with something that said, to prove yourself worthy, you either have to kill the demon who is sitting across from you, or you need to let him kill you. So that's what he came up off the mat with. This is high level egoic projection stuff. And, even after, I remember my face is, my lips cut up, I'm bleeding, I'm swelling up. And I just kept telling him, just sit here with me. Just sit here with me. There's nothing you need to do. Just sit here with me. He's like, just kill me, just kill me. But anyway, I had to take a couple months off at that point because I had to heal. I've never been beat up like that in my life. But then something changed when I started doing sessions again after that point. Rather than purging for just a couple, occasionally purging for people, it turned into I was purging for like 9 out of 10 of my clients. And I think it was an energetic protective mechanism that my body had adopted. This is kind of like people have really difficult shit in them. And if you don't get it out right away, they might come after you. He wasn't actually the first person to attack me, but he was the first person to attack me at that level. And that actually was one of the reasons why I decided to eventually stop giving sessions, is that I was just throwing up for people too much and it was wearing me down physically. Now, out of all the times of all the throw up that happened, and also keep in mind that in these events, my clients would always thank me. And actually, many of them expressed feelings of guilt. It's like, I'm so sorry that it had to come through you, but it felt so good when you released all of that. And so I really wanted it, but I feel bad that you had to do all the work. And I would tell them, look, this is just another day in the office for me. Okay, so it's okay. It's part of the job. It's all right. Now, out of all the many, 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 many times that I threw up, there were a couple times where I threw up on my clients, and they're mentioned in the video. So out of the hundreds of sessions that I did, I don't even know how many sessions I did, it happened a couple of times. And the people that it happened to were grateful for it. So I've shared that because that's fascinating. I actually think that that's data worth knowing.
Yeah, I think it's like the weirdness of these experiences. I'll throw in my own sort of anecdote there because just to sort of just to show that you're not alone here in these weird experiences, which I know you're not. But what you're describing there of when the kind of the throwing up and sort of feeling good about it and people smearing it all over the face, it sounds absolutely gross, and it is gross. There's no getting away from it, but there is value to it in that moment. And again, I was on an ayahuasca retreat. I was on a very, very heavy night, like one of the heaviest nights ever. They ended up having to sort of drag me out to the Maloka, put me in the shower and put the cold water on me. And I just felt my bowels just release and just like piping hot liquid shit just flooded down my legs, and it felt amazing. It was so warm, it was cozy, and it was totally gross. And luckily I was in the shower so I could clean myself off pretty quickly. But weird shit happens in these situations, and it's, again, you can't just like put it on paper, I think, and say, look how freaky this is, because the context is everything. And that night was actually one of the most powerful, insightful experiences of my life. It just happened to end up in a particularly gross way, but still, it was, in that moment, it was, it sounds ridiculous, but it had meaning, it had significance to me. So I think the vomiting thing is something that's being sort of way overblown, as though that this is something that happens every time, and that I think the phrase enthusiasm for it's a little bit tricky. But if we can move on,
and also,
go on.
I was just going to say, and also kind of the framing as though I wanted to do that, and it's even very clear in the video that I'm mentioning that my internal ego is saying, you can't do this, that this is not right, you can't do this, but the energy of the moment required it. And so it's not that I have enthusiasm for vomiting on people. I'm not looking to vomit on anyone, and it wasn't something that's like, oh, I can't wait to get to the next person so I can just throw up all over them, that this is going to be awesome. Because, as I would always tell people, no one wants to vomit. Nobody enjoys doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we can move on to whatever.
Cool. So the next one was one that I've got to, yeah, I've struggled with this one as to get the sort of rationale with it. And this was, Martin mentioned shoving his thumbs down clients' throats to the point of gagging while they're under the influence. Now that sounds pretty brutal, and I've watched the lamps clip, and it is pretty much sort of as you describe it, that you sort of were pushing your thumbs down in someone's throat. And from my perspective, I think my ideal 5-MeO facilitator is probably the other end of the spectrum from yourself, and that's not intended as any sort of slight against you. It's just different people have different needs.
Yeah.
And sort of I'm kind of always been in the school of like the facilitator should not ingress too much into the experience. And again, this is probably some of the reasons where I had issues with Octavio Rettig. He would very sort of inject himself into that experience. So what's the rationale behind the sort of the thumbs situation? Or was this just another one of these random situations, or how did you get there?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll introduce it by actually describing that what I would tell people, this is my end of the experience, mm-hmm. is that I would say, look, I'm actually not going to do anything during your session. That's my goal, is to not do anything. In other words, what I mean is, from the egoic perspective, I don't have a plan. I don't have an agenda. I don't have anything specific that I'm looking to achieve or do with you here in this session. So I'm just going to sit here. And for some sessions, and I also told this to Psymposia, I said for some sessions, there was zero interaction between me and the client. And I'm just sitting there the whole time. There's nothing going on. But what I am doing is making myself available to the energy that arises within the moment, and allowing myself to embody it and act on it in whatever way feels genuine and authentic in that moment. And so that does mean that many times, and I'd explain this to everyone, and this was in the PDF, it's in my book, that I use my hands, and that I would tell people, look, I might work on you anywhere along the center line of your body, because this is your central column of energy, and this is where people get stuck, mm-hmm. is anywhere along this line. And I am here to serve you. And another way that I would frame it for people is, think of it this way, because we're working with 5-MeO DMT, which really dissolves boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be working as one coordinated unit. Now, as long as your ego is holding on or resisting, then there's absolutely nothing I can do for you other than coach you. But if your ego drops, I will feel that, and then your body actually will reach out and use my body to do what you need done to you. And keep in mind, again, that this is not my plan. This is not me saying, oh, I think this person really needs my thumbs down their throat right now. And the way that I describe it in the video, the way I described it in my book, the way I describe it to Psymposia, is that for me, the clearest way I could describe it is that it felt like magnets pulling on me, where it'd just be like, oh, this person needs to be touched right here, right now. And also, with the comments that people have made on Facebook from the people who have worked with me, they have said, Martin touched me at just the right place at just the right time, because he was so in tune with what I needed. So yeah, there was a few times where a lot of people, they would open and present their mouths, kind of like, mm-hmm. and I'd be working on them, and I could feel, oh, nope, we're going in. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple times where that happened. I would also note, I don't think I mentioned this in the video, there were other times where people were sticking their fingers in my mouth as well, where they would get up off the mat and they'd be like, bleh, and they'd be grabbing onto me. So it was just one of these things. It was not common. It was rather unusual, which again, I'm mentioning these are things that are kind of unusual that I wouldn't have expected. One time when I had my thumbs in this woman's mouth, she didn't need to gag or anything. What she needed was something to bite onto. And I found that out after I put my thumbs in there, and she kind of clamped down, and I just had to say, gentle, gentle, gentle. And then she kind of slowly relaxed, slowly relaxed, slowly relaxed. And then, one of the ways that I kind of compare this, I'm not a massage therapist, but I think that massage therapists can kind of identify with this, that when you're working on somebody's body, and if you're in tune with their energy, you can find places where there's resistance, and then you can feel like, oh no, I'm being guided to touch this person here at this place, and actually the energy is drawing me in. It's inviting me into this spot because there's something here that needs to be worked on. And that's the best explanation that I can give you.
I think it's a good analogy. Yeah, that is the mark of a good, someone who can do sort of good body work. You can identify those knots, as it were. And I think, again, it depends on where somebody is in the community, how much they buy into the sort of, the whole sort of energy work sort of paradigm. But I think, when we're talking about something like 5-MeO, where you really are talking about the complete dissolution of, what it means to be a sort of an everyday human being. And if you are in a sort of a close relationship with the facilitator, I can get that dissolution, being between the two people. So I think there's one sort of kind of word there. I think it's just worth sort of unpacking, because you mentioned it a couple of times, where it was, you do what the client needs. And this was a word that Psymposia sort of latched onto, where Martin needs to do this. And I think there is the needs as in like, it can be framed in a way like, I know what you need. I
right.
You are going to, it's kind of like, you're going to submit to me. I need to do this. But I don't think that's the way you're using it. I think you use it in much more of a symbiotic sort of way. That is, this, the needs of the client. So, because I'd seen some comments like what he thinks he knows what he needs of me. And I thought, no, it's not. Again, it's a bad faith interpretation of the word, I think.
Yeah, and it's actually the opposite of the case, that if you ask, like before a session, if you'd ask me, what does this person need? My answer is, I have no idea. We'll find out what this person needs, because that's what will organically develop within the course of the session. And like I said, sometimes all they needed was for me just to sit there and not do anything. And again, it's this feeling of this energetic pull, which is, for people who haven't experienced something like this, I don't know if they can really relate to what I'm talking about, but it's just this feeling like, oh my God, this needs to happen. And that there's no thought involved. It's just I feel this energy, and so this is where I'm moving to, and this is what I'm doing. And then even afterwards, sometimes people would ask me like, so what was that you felt, or what was that you were working on? They wanted me to have like a story or an explanation for them. And my answer always was, look, it's just where the energy was. And if you, the client, if you have insights into what that was, then that's great. But I'm not here to interpret this for you. I'm not here to give you a definitive explanation. I'm not here to give you, a sense of meaning from this. I am just responding to where the energy is, and I'm acting on it in that way. And, sometimes with the throat and with the mouth, sometimes that might be people who have trouble speaking honestly, or speaking up for themselves, or letting out what they need to let out. Sometimes I'm working on the forehead with people. It was clear that it was people who tend to overthink things sometimes. Working here in the diaphragm, this often seemed to be where most people were holding on to fear and judgment of some kind, would be down in here. So, there's different correlations, but then there's also, I mentioned this in the lamps video, that a number of people I worked on their throats. And I found it curious that there were several women who I worked with. I was working on their throats, and later, because we would always have a debriefing afterwards. People could stay and talk, and we'd review whatever they wanted to review. And I also left it open that, look, if you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to.
Sure.
So that was one of my things, was that there's no expectation for you to sit around and talk to me about what happened. If you want to, we can talk as much as you want. But a number of women told me that when I worked on their throat, that they felt the effects in their genitals. That's just an interesting correlation. There were also times where I was working people on the front side of their body, and they said, but it was actually addressing something that was on my back. So that there would be these weird correlations between different parts of the body, but it was different for different people, because different people have kind of constructed their self-identity and managed their energy in different ways. So every person was unique in that sense. So I don't think that we can make I don't want to too overgeneralize what is the map of energy and how does it work within the body, because it's different for different people.
Yeah, sure. I think that's, nothing particularly controversially. I mean, even in sort of mainstream psychology, we'll have sort of, you're dealing with people who've got certain conditions, and there will be certain physical associations with, certain parts of the body. I sort of had problems dealing with grief, and it manifests very viscerally as like a literal feeling of blockage sort of here. And this is one of the reasons I did so many sort of ayahuasca retreats, is because you do that feeling of purging it out. You feel like that blockage is being released. You're pulling all that sort of grief and trauma into one place and then fire it all out. So, and again, if we take away from the kind of the shock horror value of the video, I think we can probably find in different psychotherapies or different parts of psychedelic culture a lot of sort of parallels here which people can relate to. But let's, if we go on to the next one, which was the topic around tongues. So forcing tongues in, I'll use the sort of phrase here from Psymposia. Ball recounts an occasion where he lay on top of an unresponsive woman and forced his tongue into her mouth while she was under the influence and had stopped breathing. Well, that sounds pretty grim. Well, yeah. I guess like this, the visceral reaction around this one is that there is a line that is crossed here into someone's kind of personal space. But I guess in the context of what we just discussed, it's more or less going to be the same. But would you want to flesh that one out as to what was going on there?
Yeah. So this was the example of this 79-year-old woman, and as I mentioned in the talk at Lamps, that it's actually common for people to hold their breath for extended periods of time, sometimes surprising periods of time. I would want to note that in this case, this woman, she wasn't turning blue. There wasn't any particular presentation that made me think, oh shit. It was actually the feeling. Again, I'm taking 5-MeO with my clients, and something felt distinctly different in this moment. I've had lots of people go all the way out and come all the way back in. So I'm very familiar with that. But this just felt like, whoa, I think she's not planning to come back. That was the feeling. And in that moment, her mouth was kind of, and her tongue was kind of sticking out a little bit. And in that moment, again, this is not like, what should I do about this? What would be the best course of action? It was just, no, this is it. And even to use the language, I forced my tongue into her mouth. I mean, that is completely inaccurate. Her mouth was open. What I did is I took the tip of my tongue and I pressed it against the tip of her tongue. And then I pressed in just a little bit. And while doing that, I was just kind of breathing into her, and I was lying on top of her, because sometimes this physical contact is very important, especially with people have some kind of breathing issue. Lots of people hyperventilate
Mm-hmm.
also, as well as they they get into this pattern. And what I've found is that simply pressing my body on theirs, and that they can feel my relaxed heart rate and my relaxed breathing, that it is soothing. So I'm lying on top of her, and I just pressed my tongue into her mouth, and I just kind of blew into her. And shortly thereafter, her tongue kind of pushed back against mine. And that was the first response. And then it just felt like, oh, okay, she's fine.
Can I
So
just
I
ask,
backed
I
off.
suppose the question that sort of most people would ask her is why your tongue? Why not sort of just poke with a finger or something else? Because there is a connotation of sort of intimacy there around tongue to tongue contact. So yeah, why choose that particular sort of method of contact?
The only answer I can give you is because that just is what felt needed to happen in that moment. Again, it's not a decision.
It's
It's
not a
not
rash.
like,
Yeah, it's not
yeah, it's not like, well, I mean, another option is I could have tried giving her CPR, I suppose. I could have tried doing compressions on her chest. That's just what felt like, no, actually, this is all she needs. Just this very gentle touch. And it was my tongue. So, I mean, there's not much more that I can say about it than that. And that then she started breathing, and then she came back 2 more times. And like I said earlier, that she considered it to be her pre-80th birthday present to herself. And, one of the things that Psymposia asked me is like, well, did you call emergency services? And I said, well, no, because, I mean, the whole thing's happened just over the span of a couple minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if say I were there and she didn't respond, absolutely I would have called 911.
Mm-hmm.
But she was fine, and we continued on with the session. She did not need any medical attention. So, it's, again, I because people have asked me, well, has anybody ever had any health issues? Has anybody, needed hospitalization? And my answer has always been no. But for me, that felt like the closest anybody had come. But even there, we have to acknowledge that that was my subjective interpretation of the feeling of the energy in the moment. I can't tell you if she actually was dying, if she actually was permanently leaving and not coming back. That's just what it really distinctly felt like to me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just the response that I had.
Yeah, I mean, it's one I kind of I do struggle with, because again, there's the black and white sort of version, and I can completely appreciate everything you're saying, and that you're entering into a sort of, for want of a better terms, a contract where shit gets weird. It's just a relation, and I think, yeah, if I wanted that Martin Ball experience, and I came to you for that Martin Ball experience, and I knew what I was getting to, and again, it was be completely consensual, and that's what we'd sort of, it was like, okay, I'm agreed. Let's see where the medicine takes us. Then I think that's completely fair. But I am, on the other hand, I was thinking, God, what would I do if this was me? I've come to sort of trip out on 5-MeO, and then I wake up, this dude's got his tongue in my face. But yeah, I think this is just, it's hard for me to disassociate the horror story that as it's been presented with I think the open honesty of what the situation is as you're describing it, which again, I've had some equally weird shit going on any of the retreats and stuff I've been on. Probably not quite as weird, but
no. And if I were to make a guess, and this is just a guess because I do not know, and I'm perfectly willing to admit that, but I think that actually it was the intimacy of the tongue to tongue that brought her back. That, like, here's a really intimate sensation that actually pulled her back into her awareness in her body. But that's a guess. I don't know.
I think there's something here. I'm hopefully I don't blunder this as I kind of blurt it out, but when we're in these kinds, particularly with 5-MeO, which is just so sort of top-down dissolving of kind of everything, then yeah, where does your identity, your humanness, your isness, your sexuality, these things just splurge into one thing instantly. And again, it's very hard I think for people who've not had that experience to recognize that we're not just talking complete bullshit here, but that is the experience. And if you are, if the thing you are trying to resolve, or the thing, or the place where your blockage is, it could be something that's either seen as in a kind of a very intimate area or something like that. But if that's what you need, then that is what you need, and it kind of ties in with the vomit thing. Sometimes it doesn't matter in that moment. It just doesn't. What goes down is what goes down. So to sort of pull it out as a little sort of example and just sort of throw it in the middle of the floor and say, "Oh, look at that! It's just so fucking weird." Just that's just that's what kind of rubbed me up a bit wrong about the way that Psymposia presented it, because it really was just this kind of hyper edit of, doesn't this just sound like complete freakiness, and then just throw it into the carpet, set it on fire, and walk away from it with no conversation or context. And hopefully that's what I can do here. So I think I guess what I'd sort of summarize that. I mean, if you were going to ask me in the cold light of day, like, would I be sort of cool with that? Yeah, I don't think I could quite get over myself and say, no, I'd be completely cool with that. But I can relate to the sort of the situation you're talking about. So yeah, I think let's move on to the next one, which is of a sort of similar vein, which is, it's basically the same thing, but it's, Ball states that in the context of working with people under the influence of drugs, sometimes he touches people on their genitals because that's what they need for spiritual and/or therapeutic reasons. And I think the framing here is pretty much the same. And we're kind of tapping into the shock horror of intimate, of our day-to-day intimate regions. Also, I think into the zeitgeist of the moment, which is lots of sort of sexual inappropriate behavior happening in lots of places. So yeah, is there anything you want to sort of frame around that one?
Yeah, so this again is something that happened a couple of times. I can't say for certain how many times. It's not like I'm exactly keeping track, but maybe 3 or 4 times where that occurred. And it was never, oh, let's go grab this person by the crotch. Actually, the way that it started would be that I would start with my hands on people's abdomens. And this is also something that I describe in the book Entheogenic Liberation, that what I would do is I'd put my hands on people's abdomens and then I'd press in a little bit. And what I was looking for is their pulse. And then their pulse might travel up the body and I would follow it up. It's like, oh no, they need something right here. Or their pulse might travel down. Most of the time, we didn't get past this kind of top part of the pubic area where the pulse would go down. And so, kind of above the genitals, but I consider that, that's the pubic area. So it is rather sensitive. And, to show here with the camera, it's usually my hands are like this. And so I'm just feeling that right there. And then these places where their pulse would be, there often would be like these knots of energy. Oftentimes, it is a very common description that people would give me afterwards where they would say, it felt like the movie Alien, that there was this weird thing moving around inside me and you were chasing it and then you pinned it down and then it came out and I felt better. So there were a couple of times fully clothed where then we moved past the top of the pubic area to maybe to the very top of the genitals. And then I'm just holding that there. And sometimes it's like the lightest touch, like barely touching someone. So I'm here like this, just letting that energy release. and people, their legs are open and they're and I'm just holding it right there, So this is a place where, people have been commenting on Facebook like, oh, I don't want you groping and fondling me. And my response is, I never once groped or fondled anyone. Nothing. That this is a complete mischaracterization. This is what I told Psymposia, that I said, it's similar to when you're getting a massage and that there is a point of difficult tension and the massage therapist applies pressure to that point so that the energy can release. Now, on a few, maybe 4 occasions, it involved people's genitals. And the vast majority of the time, it did not. Also something that I talked about in the lamps video, and I also shared this with Psymposia, is that what was actually far more common, since they're getting into this, like, well, what sexuality is going on here? Is this being sexual? Is that people actually would get up off the mat and try and have sex with me, or trying to initiate sexual contact with me. I had a number of people come up and grab my crotch. I had a number of women come and straddle me. I had men come at me with erections. And my policy there was I would just sit there. And they would come and like, do this thing. And what I would present them with was neutral energy. So I'm not trying to push them away because I don't want them to react to the energy of rejection.
Yeah.
And I also don't want them to react to the energy of, yes, come and do that to me. It was just, you're being sexual with me? Really? Why? And then eventually they'd realize, they'd go, whoa. And then they'd get off me. And that's the most sexual that it ever became in terms of interactions with me. Though, you have some experience with 5-MeO DMT, so you probably know that many people do get very sexual on 5-MeO DMT. It is not anywhere uncommon for both men and women to have full body orgasms. And this is, I'm just sitting there, they're having their full body orgasm. It's also not at all unusual for people to take all of their clothes off on 5-MeO DMT. I had a number of people strip naked. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, there's nothing rational about that experience at all, and I think just every single facet of your kind of what it means to be any kind of being is just smushed into well, I think smushed is the wrong thing. It joins and collaborates into one thing. So yeah, there's no, I don't think there's any boundary between the bit of you that is breathing and the bit of you that wants to procreate and the bit of you that wants to have an intellectual conversation or to be in love with its family. It's just I mean, it just is. So I don't know how familiar Psymposia are with that experience. If not, guys, try it. It's it's pretty fucking incredible. So I think
sexuality shows up, but it was not something that was ever reciprocal within my sessions. And so to characterize me as like some kind of sexual predator is just completely, it's just absurd, from my opinion. Now, people from outside, they can form their own opinions, but it's not a part of my practice.
Yeah,
it never was.
And I think that this is another one of those situations where we've got to let and give sort of some measure of credit to the people who went through it. And and I'm sure you wouldn't mind me saying this, Martin, that I think you said it yourself earlier. If they're out there, then make yourselves known. But it's not. I don't think it's right for people to start projecting on their behalf, saying, "Oh no, this is clearly rape. This is clearly inappropriate." Yeah, I think in these kind of situations, the inappropriateness, it gets very, very sort of hard to define by your sort of day-to-day standards. So we
Yeah.
just got to, yeah, have a bit of good faith in your transparency and also in the sovereignty of the client.
Yeah.
And
And actually, something that I would just like to add there is that with the original PDF that I would send to people when they contacted me saying, hey, I would like to have a session with you, I would say about 1/3 of the people who contacted me about having sessions, they would write back and they would say, okay, this doesn't sound like what I want, you know? So I kind of put it up front right there about that. And also another thing that I would just say is that it was also my practice to never once ever encourage anyone to have a session with me. That my philosophy was, if somebody asks me, I will provide them with the information of how I practice. And then if they choose to come work with me, then that is their choice. But I was not someone who went out and ever tried to solicit anyone to ever do a session with me. And even if someone, you know, in a conversation with someone, if they were discussing something that it felt like, wow, I think maybe I could help you with that, I wouldn't say that. I always wanted it to be the client's choice without any interference or influence by myself. And, you know, I think that goes to that issue of it's their sovereignty. It's their choice.
yeah, just for you personally, is there somewhere where you think there is a line there? Like if, I mean, obviously, I'm guessing if we went into the sort of the realms of like of murder and sort of knife juggling or something like that, then that would be touching. But is there something like is there a line there somewhere, or is it kind of like within the confines of that safe space that you've created? You know, with the towels and with the mat, and so, you know, again, there's no knives or hand grenades or guns lying around. Is there, can anything go then within that room?
Well, here's the way that I would present it to my clients is I would say, this is a space for you to go through and express whatever it is that you need to go through. And I want you to know that you do not need to be ashamed or embarrassed or feel that you need to hide anything from me. And in fact, I would encourage you to consider me as simply another version of yourself sitting here in front of you, because that is what I am. I'm just another version of you. And within that, whatever you need to go through, I'm here for you. And it's very important to understand that I was there for the clients. And this is something that can be very difficult for anybody to understand who's had a 5-MeO-DMT experience, because because again, I was taking it with the clients. And so the idea of what he's gonna take this too, and somehow he's gonna be paying attention to me. Like client after client that I worked with, one of the most common comments afterwards was, I don't know how you did that. That should have been impossible, but you were there for me for every single microsecond of my experience. You were there for everything that I needed, and you allowed the space for that to take place. And then within that, me as being the person serving, I had people screaming and yelling at me, you know, that because I would provide a target for them. I'm sitting in front of them, and people would be looking at me, and people would tell me, you were my father. I was looking at you and you were my father. And just like, fuck, dad, you fucking did, you know? And so this was a place for people to let out what they needed to let out. The only person who really crossed the line, I mean, I had a woman try and gouge my eyes out once, and there I had to, you know, kind of pull her hands away. The only person who really crossed the line was the guy who was trying to kill me. And again, with people approaching me sexually, I understand that's part of what they need to express. It's not here to be received. I'm not here to participate in that with them. But it really was a space where I wanted people to feel safe to go through whatever it is that they need to go through, and know that my attention is 100% focused on them, and also for their safety, and to maximize the potential of the experience as the best I could serve them. That all of this for me was an act of service. I am serving these people, not just serving them in the medicine, but I'm serving them with my presence, with my experience, with my energy, and with my ability.
Okay. So there's the final point in that Psymposia sort of mentioned, which I guess it might contrast with what you just mentioned, is a talk of your interaction with a Jewish client who.
Yeah.
I'll read the line that Psymposia used. Ball demonstrates complete disregard for the intergenerational trauma articulated by a Jewish client. In response to the client's comments about Jewish suffering, Ball states that the client comments set me off. So this is you speaking now. Set me off, and I came and sat right on his chest, and I just looked right in his face, and I said, "Do not bring that kind of bullshit into my house." So just to sort of flesh out the kind of the story here, I think there was someone who had a Jewish heritage, and they started referencing the Holocaust or something like that, and this kind of trauma was that the overall gist?
Well, I don't know if he was really referencing the Holocaust. I mean, I couldn't say that for certain because they were not the words that came out of his mouth. But to pre-frame this, this was part of the PDF that I gave to people, and this was part of my introductory talk, that I said that what we're looking for here is to bring out your real, genuine, authentic expression. Mm-hmm. Whether it's screaming, crying, purging, whatever it may be. I said, but also part of that is if I feel your ego indulging in a story or narrative or bullshit to some capacity, mm-hmm. part of my job is to call you out on that. And so I would tell people, like when dealing with energetic knots in the body, I said, my method there is not to soothe you and make you feel better. My method there is to actually get inside where this energetic knot is and then release it from inside. And that it can be physically painful. It can be emotionally very tumultuous. You can have a very strong reaction to that. And I said, in the same way, if you are indulging in something, that it's also my job to call you out on that, because I'm here also as your coach. I'm here to help you break through whatever patterns or narratives you've created for yourself are. Mm-hmm. So, do I have anything against Jewish people? No. This was a case where the energy was, oh man, this guy is going into a self-pity routine right here. That was the energy of it, was kind of we Jews have always suffered for God, and why is it so hard? He was going into this self-pity. So pretty much exactly as they describe, and as I said in the video, that yes, I went and I sat on his chest and I looked at him, and his eyes were closed. He's like, oh. And I said, do not bring that kind of bullshit into my house. And he opened his eyes and he looked at me and he said, oh, you're right. I am so full of shit. And then he just threw up on me all over himself. And then he went into this ecstatic state. And that's not to disregard his Jewish heritage. It's not to disregard intergenerational trauma. It's not to disrespect his religious tradition. I will also say that of the clients that I work with, pretty much every major and minor religious tradition on the planet was represented among my clients. This was something that he needed to be called out on. And that's all that is. And it could have been anything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have anything to do with him being Jewish. That's just how the narrative happened to come out of him, because he was Jewish, and that's how he was framing it. But the point was that it felt like that's indulgent bullshit to me, which is not to say that Jewish people haven't suffered. Of course they've suffered. Yeah. Many religions have suffered. And also, I have always been quite open that I am a critic of religion in general. Up until I got laid off because of coronavirus, I was a religion professor at Southern Oregon University here in Ashland. The first day of class, I would always tell my students, I am an equal opportunity critic. I do not belong to any religious tradition. I am not a believer of any religious tradition. I do not plan to ever be a member of any religious tradition. And as far as I'm concerned, they are all open to various levels of critique and analysis. And that's the position that I'm coming from. Because just like in working with my clients, when I'm teaching a class, I want students to know where I'm coming from, what they can expect. And every time I would start to teach a new class at SOU, 4 or 5 students would drop based on my first talk. And then the rest of the people, just like with my clients, the rest of the people who were there were like, this is the most amazing class I've ever had. I'm in this position where I have to like brag about myself, but
well, I think it's fine, Martin, because I mean, this is the kind of the nature of the situation that's been posed. We have to counter sort of one narrative with another. So, and to be honest, if I thought you were literally bragging, I'd be sitting there calling you out on it, saying that you're full of shit. But I feel like I've done my homework here, and I'm finding it hard to disagree with you, much as it would make for a much more dramatic video on my part if I could go, Martin Ball exposed as a fucking creep he is. But I can say that I probably wouldn't necessarily want to go through some of these processes you're describing, but I can't in all good faith disagree with your rationale or the evidence that's around you. And I think in this particular case with the Jewish clients, I think this is one where I've got to say I really thought Psymposia were reaching here, because if this, I think what you say is completely valid, and that if this was, if we mapped it onto a different set of beliefs or something that's not as culturally juicy as, someone of a different religion or some minority, then if we said, oh well, this was someone from the Ku Klux Klan, and they sat there and said, oh, we Ku Klux Klan, we're so, we're losing power, and we're not, and you jumped in the face and said, keep that bullshit out of my house, then where's the story? There's no story here. It's only that we can say, oh, this is religiously intolerant. And I think I could probably go and find, someone who understands these situations from a Jewish background, who would, if we pick Sam Harris is Jewish, and I'm pretty sure Sam Harris would sit and say the exact same thing of, this is, keep your bullshit out of this. This is, it's got nothing to do with this particular experience. You're wallowing in it, or you're making a victim sort of mentality. I thought this one was possibly the biggest stretch, which I've got to say did make me roll my eyes a little bit at the lengths that we're going to here to make this into something bigger than it was. But I think that's a sort of a valid sort of explanation to it. I think there's a kind of I don't know if you've got any sort of comments here on the bigger topic of how can we sort of have conversations like this, because there is this balancing act of good ideas and bad ideas being injected into the marketplace of ideas in terms of psychedelics. There is things where, say shamans, or I know you wouldn't call yourself a sort of shaman, but facilitators, and there's a more general term, have made some sort of some medicines and added some extra sort of stuff in, or have acted inappropriately, and there's been cases of people sort of dying. So there is got to be something where we can call out the bad practices, call out the bad actors. But then we've got to temper this against the sort of the moral panic and the hysteria of trying to find the smoking gun in everything. And that's how I kind of view this particular situation. And I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation and try and put this context around it, because I'm struggling to find the smoking gun here. If you're listening, Psymposia, I am struggling to find it. And again, I love the juicy drama just as much as the next person, but I think this is one where we got to, like I say, have that ballast in our tanks of rationality. And for the people who've been through these experiences, just recount it to your own experiences, how weird shit should get there. But is there anything that you'd want to sort of put around this as like a kind of a closing statement, Martin?
Yeah, I would just bring it back around, ironically, how all this started, to Mark Hayden's book, Manual for Psychedelic Guides, that, one of the issues they had was like, oh, Martin Barr wrote the foreword to that. And, here in the foreword, there's some things that I have to say here that I think that they would probably agree with. So that the reality is that interest in and access to psychedelics in both the legitimate clinics and retreat centers and among underground practitioners and providers is growing exponentially around the planet. The psychedelic renaissance is well underway, and it is transforming how we look at health, spirituality, religion, well-being, personal growth, and development, and even how we think of the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality itself. In many areas of the world, there is already legal access to psychedelic medicines in a variety of environments and experiential methodologies. In other areas of the world, legal access to psychedelic medicines is fast approaching and will soon be a prominent feature of healthcare systems and increasingly in spiritual and religious communities. So just to skip ahead for a moment. Then in much of the non-traditional modern world, use of psychedelics and practices and concerns around serving and facilitating them in experiential modalities is something of a Wild West, where there is little conformity, oversight, or professional associations with clear guidelines to systems of ethics and best practices. While this is due to some extent to the often illegality of psychedelics in many countries that have been saturated in misleading and unscientific propaganda around the supposed dangers of psychedelics, it is also due to the fact that many people simply feel called to share the medicine and have no training, supervision, or mentorship. As legal access to psychedelic medicines grow, we can expect that diverse methodologies and practices will still be present, but there will also be greater awareness around what exactly are not only safe and effective treatment modalities, but also what makes someone a skilled guide, what personal traits, psychological types, interpersonal behaviors, and interpretive modes are best suited to the profession. So, it goes on to talk about that I think that this is a step in the right direction, this idea of a manual for psychedelic guides. When I was practicing, nothing like this existed. And that when we're dealing with underground therapies and underground practitioners, there's all kinds of wild stuff going on out there. I mean, and kind of like you're saying, if Psymposia thinks that I'm wild, I mean, I know of stuff that happens here in Ashland that, even for me, it's like,
yeah, you don't even have to go to the sort of the 5-MeO DMT for things to get wild. As I say, you can go to ecstatic dance, or there's a lot of you go to the Netherlands for what is mainstream psychological sexual therapy, and that will involve a lot of sort of touching with sort of sort of proxies for you to talk, but real life people and stuff. So I think as these things do explode out into the mainstream, I think we have to get away from our sort of limited concept of when we see something like a nice clinical trial happening of someone sat in a bed with an eye mask on and it's all the lights are dim and someone sat holding the hand. Yeah, that's lovely, but that's not how shit goes down sometimes. Sometimes it goes down in explosively bizarre ways. And if we're going to accept that these compounds and these substances and experiences are on the table, then I think we're going to have to just broaden our mind a bit about what they mean, because it's not always comfortable to look at. It's not always nice and tidy. It's not that someone has a nice quiet experience and then just takes the mask off and says, wow. Yeah, sometimes it's what you described. And I've had many experiences where not quite as extreme as what was really described, but the potential was there. I'll put it that way. I get it.
Yeah. So, and, I think exactly what we're doing here is what needs to happen, is having open, honest, respectful dialogue and conversation. Psymposia could have done that with me. They chose not to. They chose to create what I have termed psychedelic revenge porn, in intermixing 4 different videos all together and all done in a way that was obviously done to create shock, horror, and disgust. If they think that is the method for producing viable conversation around psychedelics, then they're deluded, because that is not the way to go. That is it. Ironically, what they're doing is that I have made myself open transparent, honest, available, and ultimately vulnerable by sharing all of these aspects of my own practice. And what did they do? They took it, they manipulated it, they distorted it, they repackaged it, knowing that it would generate levels of disgust. In other words, they have violated and abused me. And they're accusing me of doing it. They have done the very thing that they have accused me of doing. And that is not healthy. It's not respectful. It's not legitimate. I mean, the person who put together the video, it says on their Psymposia website that he has a degree in investigative journalism. And so one of the questions that I asked him was, do you feel that this video exhibits the highest standards of ethics and practice within the area of investigative journalism or not? In my opinion, that's just malicious slander.
Yeah, I think
it's not investigative journalism.
Yeah, no, I don't think that particular example is helpful to the community. And I want to give sort of Psymposia a bit of a break here, because I have watched some of their previous videos, and I do think they have done some really great investigative pieces. So I was kind of a little bit shocked to see that kind of tone used. And to their credit, I think they've recognized this, because literally about 15 minutes before we started this conversation, they have released a newer video covering the same topic, but certainly less sensationalized. And I think that's at least a step in the right direction for Psymposia. Yeah. And I think what, you know, both you and I would be open to is, yeah, I think let have the conversation, you know, be critical, disagree with things. I think, you know, there is this psychedelic explosion happening, and things are going to have to be worked out. And I think they get worked out like this, rather than, like I say, just sort of, you know, throwing down the turd in the middle of the carpet, set it on fire and walk away, sort of like, hey, look at that. Which is how I that might be an unfair sort of, you know, criticism of what their intention was. I don't know what their intention was with that, but that's how I think it came across. And yeah, I think, you know, I think they could sort of do better there, while still having a disagreement. Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of unpacking this and having a sort of a conversation around it, Martin. And like I say, I feel like I've unpacked some of my own thoughts around that. And yeah, and I would still say it's probably not for me, mate. I don't think I would want that Martin Ball experience, but I can respect that. Not everybody wants the ayahuasca experiences that I need. You know, not everybody wants to go to the jungle. Not everybody wants to do cambo. Not everybody wants to do magic mushrooms. You know, not everything is for everyone, and I think we just need to sort of recognize that that's kind of fine, as long as nobody's being hurt or sort of or violated. And I don't think that's the case here. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it, Martin. I just like, you know, as always, mate, thanks so much for making the time and for your sort of your honesty and transparency. Again, I don't think there's a smoking gun here. I think everything that we talked about has been out in the open for a long time. But I do appreciate that. I think a good, honest conversation is more of what the world needs. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it and enjoyed speaking with you again today, Rob.